He's Howard Eibach, former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 29 years of experience. Together, Henry and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about advertising, creative briefs, and briefing. Today, Henry, we have 2 guests. We have the founder of a company called 99ravens.ai. His name is Fab Dolan, and his chief operating officer, Adam Green. And we're going to talk about their amazing tool. Let's join the conversation. Henry, we're back with another episode of the Brief Brothers. Today, we're going to do an interesting exploration of a new company. It's called 99 Ravens. They're out of Toronto. And we have with us today the CEO and founder, Fab Dolan, on the lower left, and in the upper left or right, whatever, over there is Adam Green, the chief operating officer, who reached out to me some time ago to talk to me about this cool tool that they have, and they're going to explain what it's all about. And we got to talking and said, you guys should come on our podcast because it is a very relevant topic, maybe a hot button topic. So Fab and Adam, Henry and I are delighted to have you on the Brief Brothers. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for answering Adam's email and offering. It's always nice to talk to people who dig briefs and like talking about strategy and marketing. It's increasingly rare these days, it feels like.
We could go on for hours and hours, and we have.
We have.
So why don't you begin, Fab, and then hand off to Adam and tell us, you have an interesting background. If we go onto your website, we see that you've worked for some rather big brand names in the tech world, and something got you into doing what you're doing now. So give us a little trajectory of what got you started, how you got here, and then tell us about what is 99 Ravens and why should we be interested in it?
Yeah, and thanks again. I think I'll go back to the genesis story for us. I was at Google leading Android marketing globally at the time that in 23 when ChatGPT had its really big public launch. And it was an existential moment. I think every Googler at the time would not admit it, but now would agree that it was existential for the company. And what struck me about that moment and all of the AI companies that sprouted all of a sudden and started building apps in marketing, writing tools for writers, design tools for designers, all good contributions to the public dialogue of AI, let's say, in marketing. None of it resonated for me or for my co-founder Aman Goval. We are enterprise marketers through and through. He's more on the MarTech building side. I was at General Mills initially, classically trained, eventually went to Google, worked in B2B, B2C. And when we looked at our experience in marketing, when we looked at the campaigns that failed, the times that we missed, almost always it came down to a bad brief and a poorly executed strategy, a difficult process of collaborating, getting internal sign-off, the fourth subcontracted agency not staying aligned to a strategy that was written in Minneapolis. These were the problems that we had. And what we saw was a quite literal application of generative AI to writing tools for writers, design tools for designers, and not to disparage any of that, but it didn't resonate with us as enterprise marketers. And so what we wanted to do was see if we could apply AI to what we believed were the more impactful parts of the value chain in marketing: collaborating, ideating, researching, deciding, the parts where human ingenuity and human input really count, the parts where there's still the most expensive time, talent, and money. And if you get that right, the part where every agency we've spoken to since, every marketer that we've worked with in the past says, if you get that upfront stuff right, the rest of it starts to flow more naturally. And so that's the genesis story of Ravens. The original concept in the VC deck was, what if there was a Grammarly for writing a better brief? And that's where we started, and we've taken it from there. We can go into talking about the product, but Adam, I dragged you into it midsummer last year, and so maybe you can pile on here as well. But that's the start, Howard.
Yeah.
Do you want to add? You go ahead, Adam. Let's hear your part. We're eager.
So my background, I also am an ex-Googler. I worked with Fab and Aman at Google. And we all met when I was leading creative agency relationships for the Canadian market. And I saw this problem from the other side, from the agency side. I was tasked with trying to push technology into the advertising workflow to be able to get better campaigns coming out the other end. And I saw my clients struggling every day with requests to make a viral video or something akin to that, and saw the detrimental effects that vague, incorrect, inaccurate, incomplete client briefs had on them and their business, and how the endless hours of clarification that they had to spend at the beginning just ate into the cap of their billable hours budget. Because while the client, in many cases, though not every case, was paying for that time, the budget wasn't unlimited, and every hour that they were spending just figuring out what it is that we're really trying to do here was an hour that they weren't cracking the strategy and then executing on the problem. And so when Fab, now years later, knocked on my door and said, "Hey, we're looking at doing this," I was at a different ad tech company, had been there, and was as the chief strategy officer at that company, and said, "Oh my gosh, I struggle with this, with getting to a great strategy and deploying it. Let's do this thing."
Okay, so your promise is to help, correct me where I'm wrong, to help marketers come up with a better brief for their agencies. The brief, and Henry and I talk about this a lot, the brief comes after the strategy. So are you assuming that something is going to help them arrive at the strategy? Is that what else the 99 Ravens tool can do?
Yeah, so this is a really good point. And back to the origin story and Grammarly for a better brief. What we learned talking to marketers and agencies, data vendors, the ad platforms, is briefs are where strategy gets codified and where there's alignment and where it sort of turns into a true like RFP, SOW, and everybody has their marching orders. But what we learned along the way was that if we can focus on that 0 to 1 problem, so 0 being, okay, maybe we have the initial impetus for, we need to have some type of marketing campaign out there. Maybe it's a new product, maybe it's a challenge in the market, shift in consumer behavior, something like that. Where things get codified is the brief, but where we can help is in translating disparate thoughts, documents, transcripts, emails, product presentations, taking those raw materials and starting to solidify them in a more crystallized form that is like a brief, or could be in a 4Ps structure, something that starts to organize all of the Lego pieces on the table. So generation is a big thing for us, is that getting from those raw inputs into the makings of a strategy. The second thing that we learned was that where the Grammarly reference was poor, it sort of assumes that you could have an AI that gives a singular perspective, and all marketers and agencies alike would generally look at it and say, yep, that was the right thing to do. And of course, what I think is obvious to most who've worked in the industry is that marketing is a team sport. And it's a team sport that's built on perspectives. That's where great strategy comes from. So the other element that we've added in addition to being able to handle any type of document, any type of data, is perspective. So what we're actually doing now is, so if we were all working together and collaborating as a team, we would build an AI agent around you, Howard, and your thoughts on strategy from the highest sort of order, like in your strategic DNA, down to how do you interrogate a target audience statement on an integrated campaign brief. And we do the same for Henry, we do the same for Adam, myself. And that is what we're putting into the hands of our users. So you can do it in the context of writing a brief. You can do it in the context of having just a strategic conversation and chatting with these various AIs, ultimately trying to get to something that is, a finished product like a brief.
I can see it's easy to start playing devil's advocate and picking nits with things, but I want to stop.
Do it.
Well, no, because I think the important question to ask is, because creatives and strategists have tons of those kinds of challenges. My question is, what does the creative look like? What does the brief look like? How do the creatives respond to the briefs that are produced? Do they know that? I mean, I'm going to assume that they know that this is an AI assisted, not generated, but an assisted with human hands touching it. What do they think? What do they think of the briefs?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit like a, how long is a piece of string kind of question. Um, uh, and it's going to depend on the skill of the person using the tool. So one thing that I think is important to note is we're not making a brief writing tool where like you put in a bunch of data and you get a creative brief at the other end. We're more like making an e-bike for a strategist. So if the strategist is going to write the creative brief that goes to the team, we don't want to take over their job, right? If you think of them like a chef and the creative brief is like the perfect, 3-star Michelin meal. We're not trying to be the chef. We're trying to be the sous chef. We're trying to go to the grocery store and get all the ingredients for that strategist to write the brief. So it may not be necessary or desirable or relevant, frankly, for them to tell the creative team, hey, I used some AI to help assemble all of the ingredients to make this brief for you. They might want to tell them that. They
I think
might
it's
not.
assuming that I don't think anyone in our business is going to say, I've never used AI. Not going to
Yeah,
use
exactly.
it. It's just everybody uses it
At
in
this
one way or
point,
another.
you'd probably be hard pressed to find a creative brief where someone on the strategy team wasn't using ChatGPT or Claude, or frankly, like even if they're Googling stuff to go into the brief, there's a ton of AI behind the scenes that goes into Google search that they haven't seen. So I would say with some confidence that there isn't a brief in the last 20 years that hasn't had some level of AI going into informing it. Our tool is just something that's purpose built for that workflow to take a strategist and say, let's get all of your data in one place and help you get to a point where you can write something quickly.
I'm struggling to ask good questions here because this is all so new. And I use ChatGPT. I've also used Claude. I think I've used, is it Perplexity? What's the other one?
Yeah, Perplexity probably for
Perplexity.
searching. Yeah.
I prefer Chat myself. And I've got the paid version versus the free version.
Mhm.
So like everybody else, we're all figuring this thing out. You obviously are at a higher level, maybe an order of magnitude beyond the average Joe using the tool. So I'm going back to the kind of nitpicking that I think a lot of creatives and strategists might bring up. But what I'm hearing, I mean, it's like, I want to have the final say on this. I don't want it to do the writing for me. None of that is what you're promising. What is the difference between what you have, your tool, and the stuff that's out there right now?
Well, there's
That was my
three.
question.
So let's dive in, and it's a great question. So first, let's see if we can agree on this. What we've heard from strategists, from marketers, from client side and agency side is there's essentially three raw materials or ingredients that go into good strategy. So there's client data and client inputs. There are expert perspectives. And then there's real world data, whether that's cultural, like what's trending on TikTok, Reddit, et cetera, or it could be data from Ipsos, Gartner, you name it. But the sort of three thematic things that come into the product. And for each of those, we are bringing them together in the same time and place with AI. That's what strategists tell us is hard, is the getting the groceries of all of those things is in a world where an agency often isn't the AOR with a client, they're getting less and less billable hours for strategy. And clients are often saying like, I just want a couple ads for Facebook. Why do I have to brief you on my full business context for 10 hours? So you're getting less and less of the client inputs. You have less access to all the expert perspectives. It's hard to get executives in a room. It's hard to get internal and external. You're working at 9 p.m. on a Saturday, hopefully not too often as an agency. You don't have access to the CMO. And then, of course, the sort of cultural data and real world data is exploding. And so what we do that goes beyond what you could do in ChatGPT and Perplexity, et cetera, is to securely bring all of those things together. So on the client data side, we're creating virtual private clouds and secure workspaces for every single one of those so either at the client level or at the brand level. So what that does for you as an agency, it means that now you can chat with a brief. So you might have a one-page brief, but you can chat with portions of it and say, hey, have they ever done a campaign like this before? What other insights and segmentation information do they have? And that is connected to the client's internal secure database of past campaigns, past briefs, research, et cetera. So that's thing one. So like you're securely bringing in the right information and that's often on the client side from an AI perspective, the hardest part. Like no one has very well structured data. The second thing is perspective. So I mentioned that we focus on what we call strategy anthropology. We try to build AI agents around real people. We have no desire to build generic, easy button sort of personas. Like what most people will do in ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude is say, pretend you are an expert strategist, pretend you are an expert media planner, and answer the following question. Well, we want to go much, much deeper than that. We want to know the books that influenced how Howard came to think of strategy in a particular way, articles that you've written, podcasts that you've done, how you approach strategy at a thematic level and how you approach it within the context of like an events brief, something very specific. So we create these deep personas. And so in the product, you have access to client data. You have access to all of these perspectives and can work with these unique AIs. And then what we are doing on top of that is layering on external data that we scrape and pull, and we're doing licensing deals with data vendors as well. So you're taking all of, back to the start, the three raw materials or ingredients for really great strategy, and we're putting together all of those things in the same workflow that's dedicated for briefing that requires very little of the user in terms of prompts, which is the other thing that we hear. Like the experience that you have with Claude or GPT or Gemini is different from Henry, is different from someone else, and often it's the user and their prompting experience. And we try to sort of create a more consistent quality experience across that.
Okay. I'm going to come back to the question I asked you before, and you said it's like asking how long is this piece of string? What do creatives think of this? I mean, I'm a former creative, so I want to know. Henry's used your tool to write a brief. I know I've seen Henry's briefs. He writes a really good brief. I've used his briefs for my teaching tools. I know his creatives like his briefs. Okay. Now Henry's got this tool and he's using it. Am I going to notice a difference?
Can I ask a question on this?
Sure.
Because we need a little bit more.
I know.
What about Henry's briefs? What do you like about Henry's briefs? Is it the style, the substance, the category? Yeah.
They're short. He fits it on a single page. Everywhere I go to do a training, I hear this like, we have a 12-page brief. We have a 6-page brief, whether we're launching a campaign or we're changing the font, we got a 6-page brief, right? All right.
Right.
Henry has used another thing I like about what Henry does. I prefer a brief that asks questions. Henry does both. He has topic headings and questions. So I get to think about it in two different ways. So he'll have a topic, and I don't have a copy of his brief in front of me, but
I don't want to make this a referendum of Henry versus AI because
no, and I don't want it to be either. But
it won't be, Henry.
But you're the guy sitting here, so I have to use someone's brief that I know, and I'm using yours just as an example. Okay, so it's not about, is Henry's brief going to start getting sucky because he's using AI? I'm just trying to figure out, as the person who would receive his brief and work from it, what's Henry's already rolling his eyes at me. What I want to look at the actual concrete impact. How would it be better?
So I think in an ideal world, you might notice Henry's briefs becoming more like Henry's best briefs, because it's not that the tool is going to generate the brief. It's that Henry's going to use the tool, right?
I get that. We're not talking about generating briefs with this tool. I completely understand that. It is It's like your number one assistant. I
Yeah,
get that.
exactly. So I think in many cases, like let's say Henry was the best brief writer and he was never going to give you a garbage brief, which Henry, we just met, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and assume that that's true.
I've written plenty of garbage briefs. Let's
And
let's get
everybody and
that off.
everybody
We
has,
all have.
and everybody has, right? And
Right. So in that case, you're probably, as the creative, not going to notice a huge amount of difference. You're going to be like, oh, I used to get great briefs from Henry, and I now get great briefs from Henry. Ideally, you would notice like the number of times you got a brief that you thought wasn't good would shrink. The biggest difference, I think, is probably going to be in Henry's life, where Henry says, so we go back to the chef analogy, right? It's like if Henry's an amazing 3-star Michelin chef, but he has to do all of his own grocery shopping, he has to dice all of his own onions, wash all of his own potatoes, boil all of his own water. It takes him a certain amount of time to get to the point where he is like putting the chef magic into the dish, right? Whereas if he has a sous chef and a team of prep chefs in the kitchen, he doesn't have to spend his time doing that. Henry can now write 12 briefs in a month instead of 2 or 3 or however many you're rate limited to based on needing to get all of those inputs in place to be able to write the brief.
this
From
still
your
assumes
perspective, Howard, you're just like, I don't know, I got great briefs before and I
okay.
get great briefs now.
I'm trying to channel other creatives and anticipate the kind of questions that they might ask, and I might be spot on, and I might be out in left field. I don't know, but I'm trying to get down to a concrete thing here, and
Mhm.
it comes down to the one thing we haven't yet talked about is, can Henry trust the sous chef?
Mm.
Well, ultimately, so let me give you a real world example. I'm not going to name the agency that we're working with because I don't want to give away too much here. But one of the things that will speed Henry up in the writing process, uh, for us, is the belief that if you were in the room and you both had infinite time to be able to collaborate, you would make his brief writing better. So what I'm hearing, and the reason I asked the question is this is a lot of what we do in our initial intake and AI building, is I'm listening for things like, oh, you like a bit more of sort of optionality and ways into a brief that don't like I'm taking a little further, and so you might disagree with some things here, but what I heard in your very fast description is there are a few sort of open-ended questions, threads that you can pull on, right? And those are things that, because they're rooted in language, you can train into an AI. And so to give you an example of one of the ways that we're working with agencies and across strategy research more sort of narrowly, and then creative, it started to codify those things. So one example was this agency. We started with them and they said, look, like, it's almost pointless to create these AI agents off of us. We don't have a style. We don't have a point of view. A lot of other agencies, you go to their website, they have a particular way of doing things that they really champion. We just meet the brief where it is and try to give an honest take on this and bring really great strategy, really great creative. And then we started interviewing them and noticed that their strategists were downplaying data in preference for feelings. So they really wanted to focus on, okay, notwithstanding the business context and some of the audience segmentation data, they valued writing briefs that had quotes, anecdotes from real world users. So, and they called it getting out of the boardroom and getting with users. And then what is this campaign or what is this product going to make someone feel? And so that was, so that's the strategist point of view. And then when we interviewed their creatives, the creatives, you can tell there's a generational difference here. The interview was all about vibes. The campaign has to have a vibe. And again, like we sort of hit a brick wall interviewing them and said, no, you can't train an AI on this. And I said, okay, what's a vibe? Like I'm not a boomer, but I'm, from a personality standpoint, I'm very much a boomer. So explain vibes
You
to
might be
me.
the greatest generation at career
Yeah,
check.
exactly. Yeah, that's true.
And you look damn good. You
I've
look
got all
damn
the
good for
gray hair. Yeah.
97, you know.
Well, thank you. So, and then he described it to me and he said, before I even start getting to the application of the idea, I want musical references. I want film. I want television. I want fashion. I want to create in my mind a mood board. And you can start to see where this really starts to mesh quite well with the strategist that talked about what is someone going to feel and what are the anecdotes, and so on. And so in building their AI, now we've got some symmetry there. We've got some differences in how they articulate it. And so what we're doing is building for the strategist a creative AI that is their co-pilot. So the kinds of things that you like in Henry's brief writing is actually quite similar, but that creative AI starts to interject now for them and say, hey, you're boxing me in. Give me some musical references here. Give me some other notes here that I could, when this brief actually gets to the human creative, you've given me even more of the goodness that I would naturally go look for, et cetera. So you start to have the co-pilot in the room that helps you write as if that person was there with you. And it's different from every agency. Like I've just described something that is very much, you can tell it's like it leans towards brand, it leans towards creative platforms. And then when we work with other folks that are more in media, much more about business context, it couldn't be a more different conversation. It's like, look, if this brief doesn't detail in the client language in terms of marketing science, the minimum spend threshold for this campaign, and then the maximum spend beyond which you're getting diminishing returns, it is not a good brief. Like that is a very different thing to look for. But these are the subtle cues that we build into these AIs, and any one of them is typically a required meeting or a 20-minute homework project to go find the document, or a quote unquote poorly written brief that someone then has to fix and go, okay, I'll go get the data and so on. So these are the things that we're trying to fix. Candidly, like where there's the most fruit for us as a company is just all the bad briefs in the world. So I actually don't know if you and Henry are our target market. Not at this stage. Like we want to, it's one of these things that our never-ending goal will be to impress people like you. But where we add value is the client that you every time get something from them and it's 21 pages go, okay, there's my Saturday. And that's what we're fixing right now. And there's too many of those WTF moments in strategy and briefing because clients have deprioritized it. Strategists don't get paid enough in terms of billable hours to do it. And what we hear is that strategy used to be a team sport and used to have a few strategists and you'd be in a room together and debate stuff. And now it's incredibly lonely. Like you're at 8 p.m. at home doing something going like, I hope this is a thing when I show it to the creative team tomorrow and I don't get laughed out of the room, but you have no one there as a sounding board. And that's why I keep coming back to the answer is perspective. And I honestly can't answer what is a great brief for you and Henry. But I'm quite certain that in building these AIs, we can get you closer to what you believe it, because it's fundamentally trained on you and your belief system about briefs in your context.
Yeah. If we were making the sous chef, we don't want to turn the sous chef into Henry, but we want the sous chef to understand Henry likes the onions chopped this way. Henry likes the carrots peeled this way. Henry wants all of these types of inputs so that he can do his best work.
Henry, what do you say? What do you think?
We're pumping your tires like
No,
crazy.
Yeah.
listen. I think it sounds phenomenal. I do think that you do have competition out there from this more generalized AI. I think you have a compelling argument for your differentiation. Do you have like an explainer video or something we can steer people to, like to give them like the elevator pitch in kind of a visual format or anything like that? Or is it just your website that we should direct people to?
Yeah, we actually we're posting more and more content to our YouTube channel, so I can send that along after. And there's
We
a couple videos right there that you can share. Yeah, they're public.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Again, what has been the response from the clients? Meaning not your clients, people who who have hired you to help them do better strategy briefs. Are they happy with it? I mean, I kind of know the answer to the question before I've asked it, but I want to know, what are they saying to you?
Adam, why don't you cover media, cover creative, and cover client side? I think that would be good to see, because I think the answer is different for yes. we wouldn't be a good startup, Howard, if we didn't say, yes, everybody universally loves the product.
Yeah.
But Adam, why don't you just jump in and maybe like, let's talk about this in different segments? Because I think it's actually an interesting conversation, Howard, talking about what are the brief challenges in each part of the workflow and depending on the role. So Adam, over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So we'll start at one end and go to the other, right? We'll start with the client. So the clients, depending on what kind of client they are, they're seeing really positive value out of it. So if you're a really big, sophisticated client, you're like a bank or something like that, um, the value that you get out of it is mostly compliance. You're like, we're a bank, we have standards, we know how to brief our agencies. We're spending, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year in marketing. We've got 50 years of best practice, but we also have 400 marketers on our team. And if we want to go from being like everybody's neighborhood bank to all of a sudden now we're going to be the AI bank of the future, I've got to make sure that message gets scaled out through 400 marketers and all the briefs that they are writing of various flavors, right? They might be a big creative platform with a creative agency. It could be a little event that they're running, in Duluth, Minnesota at bank branches. But they need to imbue that message into all of those projects. So for them, they get compliance, and that's fantastic. They also get other savings, but the compliance thing is what makes the CMO's pupils dilate, because she's sitting there saying, how do I get 400 people to march to the beat of one drum? And the answer is, let's intervene at the moment of highest leverage, which is the very beginning of the project, when you're briefing the agency, when you're sending them the inputs. If you're a little tiny client, you probably don't know what good looks like. And this isn't universally true. There's little tiny clients or wicked marketers. But in many cases, if you're a little tiny company, marketing is probably not your forte, right? Like, you're too busy doing all the other millions of things and building your company. And so if you're going to spend money with an agency, you probably also don't have a ton of budget. You're probably not the highest on that agency's list. If you want to get the very best out of them and you've never done this before, it's very handy to have something guiding you to make sure that, all right, I'm going to pay this agency. I want to get the very best out of those brains that I've rented. And if I didn't have this tool, I'm going to waste a chunk of that time, maybe a very material chunk, just them asking me what the heck it is that I want to do. And that's not great value. I might like it, it might be a pleasant experience to get to hang out with my agency. They're cool people. Henry's shaking his head. He's like, we are not cool.
No, I'm shaking my head because I don't think any client has ever said I want to spend more time with my agency. But
You say that? I was talking to a massive CPG company, and they were saying advertising is half of my budget, less than 10% of my time, and it's the most fun time. They were like, I love
well,
going into my agency.
I could see that, but I also see that they're, like you say, time starved,
Yeah,
and it's just one meeting after another, and I agree. I don't think they give the advertising enough love, but I don't know that it's that they enjoy, particularly those types of meetings where it's you know
exactly.
the interview with the client to get at the heart of what do you really want, what do you really need, because let's face it, cobbler's kids go barefoot, and a lot of times these marketers are not really um, as plugged in as they should be in terms of identifying what the actual problem. I mean, I like to use the analogy of a law firm, and Howard's heard me use this a lot, right? A lot of clients have in-house counsel, and in-house counsel is great for a lot of things, um, contracts and so forth. But you get into a problem when you need to litigate, you go and you get a litigation firm because
Yeah,
they're in court every day, and that's a very different set of skills than writing and reviewing contracts and the kind of mundane things that an in-house counsel does. So you go out and you get the best, and I think that's still the pull of an ad agency, is we give you that outside perspective. but
100%.
but in order to give you that outside perspective, we need to understand the truth of what's going on your side. And we have to have those meetings. And ideally, the client brief is the vehicle by which they do that. but as we know in practice, it ends up being a dumping ground for 50 pages of research and
Yeah,
data
you get like War and Peace that you then have to like read through to figure out what's going on. And
And
to use
our
to further
episode.
your analogy, oh, sorry, Howard.
No, I'll just say our episode this week. What is today? It was Friday. Just 2 days ago, we dropped an episode where we were discussing a paper from the WARC, World Advertising Research Center, that asked the question, why do agencies rewrite client briefs? And that's why. We
Yeah,
need to find that we need to find the gem in that 50-page tome.
yeah. You got to go mine through it to find the diamonds. So Henry, to further your analogy, when you have to litigate something, you go hire that litigator, right? If the only person within your firm who deals with the litigator is your in-house counsel, in-house counsel is probably like they're not the people who run the division that is being litigated, right? Like, so you have this game of broken telephone. We see that with marketers as well. Often it's if you ask the marketer, what's the business problem? They legitimately don't know, especially at like great big enterprise level companies. We'll stick with the bank example. The manager of the credit cards division has come to them and said, "Hey, our SMB card is, not getting enough traction. Can you magic us up some marketing to make it happen?" And so then they're as a marketing team going to the agency. So when the agency says, "Hey, what's the problem here?" The marketing team often doesn't know, right?
Well, they do know.
So
We're not
having
selling
the
enough.
pardon.
Yeah. he's
Yeah.
he's
Yeah, exactly. The number of times that what's your business problem? Well, we'd like sales to be higher.
I
Like,
mean,
I don't think there are
it's like
companies where that's not true.
I joke. I say creative briefs don't need to have them. And Henry and I debate this. Creative briefs don't need to say what the marketing objective is because it's
Yeah,
two
just
words: sell more.
sell more. Always.
Always. Now you
Yeah.
get down into nitty-gritty details that maybe the marketers care about, but the creatives don't.
Yeah.
One of the things that I came across when I was looking at one of your competitors, we've talked about before I hit the record button. They have a claim on their website that says we de-risk your marketing. We
Hmm.
de-risk. I've never seen the term de-risk. I thought, okay, for CMOs and CEOs of some companies, that's going to be music to their ears. But if you want to have an impact, if you want your brand to have an impact, that's a death tome, a death knell. Don't take risks. And
Well, so
as a creative, I'm going to say, oh, okay, if your tool is promising to de-risk the marketing, whether that's in a creative brief or the output, I'm going to say, what? I don't want to work on that piece of business.
yeah.
We take risks for a reason. Tell Apple not to take risks. Tell Tesla not to take risks. And they wouldn't be what they are today. Although Tesla, that's maybe
So
not a good example, but
yeah, I was going to say I feel like they take a lot of risks, whether they want to or not.
do you understand what I'm getting? What I'm getting at is, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. I don't want to work with a tool, and I'm not a strategist the way Henry is. I don't write briefs. I teach people how to write briefs from the perspective of what creatives want, because I'm a former creative. Henry has reminded me that I'm a lot more strategic than I think I am. But the point is, I don't want to have a tool, a sous chef, whatever you want to call it, that is going to, and I think most AI tools do this, go to the common denominator. They
so
go to the
I
they go to
love
the
this,
happy
Howard.
medium.
Yeah, this is so good.
I love this topic. So, and it's something we should have touched on when we talked about Perplexity, ChatGPT, et cetera. By definition, those models, I know there's reasoning models that try to get around this at this point, but they are trying to make a probabilistic sort of directional move in something that is towards the mean, right? Here, I
Mhm.
have this insurance company brief, and out the other side comes stuff that sounds like, yeah, that's a brief, that's marketing, that's a tagline, but it's derivative of what comes before. That's how these
Yep.
systems are built. And this is why we focus so much on perspective. We do not want to be a singular answer. We do not want to be a quote unquote easy button. So I don't know how that competitor meant the word de-risk when they wrote it. I
You can
actually
see it
don't
on their
mind it.
website.
I can take a look at it and see.
Yeah.
I don't mind it as a word because where I take the word de-risk is actually I go in the same direction that you're going. The riskiest thing that you can do in marketing today, would be to use any of these other sort of off-the-shelf LLMs and models and come up with content, come up with ads, and put them out into the world. There is a flood of content marketing, ads, videos, you name it. It's so easy to produce. The only meaningful advantage going forward is strategy. And strategy comes from perspective and good data. And so when I hear the word de-risk, I wouldn't use it in our marketing, but if I'm sort of generous and play with it, I actually want it to go in, the de-risking is don't be boring, don't be derivative, be unique, have longevity, have differentiation. And the way you do that is through perspective. So you could, let's take what you just said, we could create a Howard AI in our system that would interrogate the executive summary, interrogate the audience description, the insight, all of these sort of key like inputs into the brief, and look for, does this smack of status quo, cliche, jargon, the expected in the category? What are the questions that I can push if it's Henry writing the brief? What are the questions that I can ask Henry that will push his thinking further to get away from? So another agency that we work with, they pride themselves on being contrarian. I think a lot of agencies try to do that. They've spent a lot of time trying to codify what it means to be contrarian. So the same way that BCG has their standard 2x2 matrix, this agency has frameworks and methodology for how you brainstorm and push yourself to be contrarian in a brief and in a creative ideation session. And that's our work with them. When we build AI agents around them, we build it around that chain of thought. Because we're working with them, I don't want to give away the actual chain of thought. But those are the things that I think you can do, and I think you're bang on. We see that I advise a cybersecurity company, and they were so proud one week that they came out with 4 pieces of content. They worked all week. They got all the internal approvals. They wrote a piece on data poisoning, a piece on phishing, et cetera. And at the end of the week, they published it. And then we went on Google search and saw every single one of their competitors has an article on it, has a webinar on it, has like 19 pages of content for it. And who knows how much of it was done by a 10-person content team, a 10-person content team plus AI, plus Jasper, plus all these tools. So it really, like, you've latched on to the most important thing, which is that there's no worse time to be derivative. And that's why we focus so much on the brief, because in our parlance, and I'll shut up here, I've gone on a big rant, but we think of a great brief as a great prompt. So sure, use the automation tools, but first nail the brief, because if you nail that, you're going to get way more differentiated content from all of those automation tools downstream.
And I think
Adam,
that's the most.
go ahead.
Yeah, I would say I don't know what that competitor was, what they meant by that claim, but I think the most favorable interpretation of it is what Fab said. Like, de-risk the process, not the marketing. Don't not take risks in your marketing, but make sure that your inputs are great, that your brief is your origination of the project is as good as it can be, so that you're not just like hoping for the best through a messy process. Like, take informed risks knowingly, purposefully with the marketing, not with the process to get there.
Well, I have to confess, I could easily have misunderstood what they intended, but I'm seeing it as a creative. And when I see de-risk, I'm saying, whoa, that pushes a button for me.
Yeah.
And I will go back and look at it and carefully. I have a feeling it's not what I saw on their website. They do have a 1-minute-ish video that explains how this thing works. And I think that's where I saw it. Nevertheless, this is something that Henry and I have talked about before, this divergence, this dichotomy of understanding what a creative or ad agency wants to achieve in its work versus what the client wants to achieve. The marketer, the CMO, has different objectives. I want to build my career. I want to send my kids to school. I want to have a nice mortgage, get a nice house. Whereas the creative will say, I want to win fucking awards. I want to be on, I want to be on the cover of this magazine. I want to show that my work has had an impact on a brand. And those two don't always mesh.
Yeah. And you want to know that going in, right? Because otherwise, like, how many projects have both of you been on where you thought that this was something that had potential. Like we could swing for the fences on this pitch, and the client does not want the ball to go over the fence. The client's like, we're gonna bunt this. I don't care how juicy this fastball looks. This ball is gonna go 12 feet, not out of the, not past the pitcher. And you're looking at it being like, guys, we could hit this thing. And you clash and you waste time and they're frustrated and you just never get there.
I think, you know, uh, I don't want to be the downer here, but ultimately, until we're all replaced by machines, there's always going to be the problem of human communication to each other. Uh,
100%. We're not going to
uh,
be perfect, but at least get all the ingredients there. I think is all, what we're trying to go for.
All the ingredients, yes. And I think one of the other things that we've learned in the process is just how much human to human feedback is repetitive. Like we talk to CMOs that feel like every meeting I'm saying the same thing to junior marketers, do it this way. We learned this insight over here, and they feel like they are just their only job in the company is taking learnings from one team and trying to ping pong it around the organization. And so this is the kind of like I think Henry, and maybe I'm reading into some of the questions and commentary here because we wholeheartedly agree with you. The part of our focus on human ingenuity and perspective is that we never want a version of our product that does everything for everyone and just sort of, okay, great, here are all your inputs, here's a brief, here's a strategy, and so on. I think what we've seen, so what my co-founder Aman was building AI in Google starting years ago, and consistently found that approach failed. You just get rejected. Human after human expert would say no. Like to a non-expert, that looks like a blog. To a great copywriter, it's terrible. It's not going out the door. Was often sort of the response, and the same went for visual creative, and the same for video, and so on. So we can have it both ways, I think, at this stage in AI, where we don't have to aspire to get rid of the expert humans and in fact just create more seamless ways, and at the same time create these cheat codes, right? So I gave the example of the CMO often giving the same feedback over and over again. You codify some of that into an AI that then can coach a junior marketer in the moment. All of a sudden, you don't have to have as many lunch and learns. All of a sudden, the research report that everybody has to listen to, the presentation, the PDF, and hope you remember it when you're writing a brief. You've got an intelligent assistant that can bring that in contextually in a brief that it's relevant to. So those are the moments that matter for us and where we think we can help. And some of them, like we've spent a lot of time today talking about the craft of strategy and sort of where that meets creative on the client side. And I've only, confess, I've only been on the client side. So I'll give, maybe the other perspective here is quite often where we miss on briefs is just much more functional. Like I wrote a brief for Android for flip phones, Samsung flip phones. And we found this really, through research, found that the number of people that know that Google is behind Android is incredibly low. And yet the affinity at the time for Google was really, really high. And so we thought, okay, there's some tension there. We can use that as a jumping off point to move people from iPhone to Android, and we'll do it with these great flip phones that have, can put a lot of noise in the market. And then there's other data that went with that said, hey, Gen Z is the best target for that. And what we didn't stitch together was all of the information that I just gave you on target audience and insight, and the billions of dollars of pre-bought media that Google had done in a separate media team that bought a bunch of out-of-home and TV, and we were locked into that buy. And so we had this like very Gen Z creative airing on, I'm going to say 2.5 Men in the US, but it's probably, not that the same generation. But that therein lies some client problems. And that is like you and Howard and Henry, you guys are operating at a level that most marketers and strategists can only aspire to vacation in, and you live there in terms of strategy.
We're nerds,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So you got to remember that somewhere there's a marketer saying, yeah, Gen Z watches a lot of TV. Let's buy that and put it in the brief because that's going to speed up my day. We already bought that media. Let's go. And so I think that's the gift that we want to give people like you is just don't receive that brief.
Yeah.
Like have that be fixed on the client side so that when you get it, you can focus on taking that from okay or good to excellent and great.
You wanted to add something, Adam?
Yeah, so the range of mistakes that can happen, whether it's what Fab just mentioned or one of our clients who was explaining to me they got to the day before launch on a campaign, and then the client told them that the product was only available through Walmart the day before. They were like, this is information would have been real good to have way back at the beginning. And that happens surprisingly frequently. And so that's the part where de-risking, I think, can make sense, where it's like, let's de-risk those errors, those landmines that no one ever needed to step on. And they were going to ruin your campaign no matter how great the idea was, because it turns out you can only buy the product in Walmart. Or
Yeah, well, we know from guests who've been on our show before who have done surveys that 90% of marketers in this particular survey admitted that they changed the brief after the creatives have been briefed in. That's
yeah,
an example. It's like, oh, by the way, we knew that it was only in Walmart. We just sort of forgot to put that in the brief,
yeah.
or maybe we found out, 8 weeks later. Um, what is next for you? What do you have another next step? Is it just continue to grow to get the word out? What's in the future for you?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, so from age and stage, we're a pre-seed, seed stage company, and so product development for us is the product changes twice every week. Like we're on very fast sprints. Um, what we want to do is build a platform where we can democratize strategy. So I've met you two, like rarefied strategy air. Most people do not think like you do in briefs, and and I think that there are small businesses, there are startups, there are certainly enterprises that obviously could benefit from that type of advice. And while most are focused on AI's ability to replace humans or are just overly focused on sort of tactical applications of AI in data structuring, in writing, and chatbots, and so on, our strong belief is that it has the ability to take expertise, which is this scarce resource that's locked in sort of location and time in people's brains, and bring that to more people. So one of the learnings, so this is a little bit back to one of your questions, Howard. One of the experiences that we've had continually with agencies and clients is realizing that this has the ability to change their relationship and start to put these agents in such a way that now you go from an agency that is sometimes there, is sometimes in the room, maybe gets paid for the creative platform, but isn't there to execute on the social campaign because that's the internal team, or the content marketing because that's the internal team, or events because that's another agency. And now you go to a more always on relationship. And we can, so for in the enterprise space, it tends to be this sort of unlocking of, hey, the agency and the CMO via their AIs can collaborate all the time. But if we're doing that at the enterprise level, there is this notion that we could do it for everyone. So, put more simply, what if every small business could have access to Henry via Henry's AI at some level?
And what if Henry could
That's
have access to their budgets via the platform? So they
yeah.
could all pay Henry to write their briefs. Because, I mean, Howard has said your briefs are the best, Henry.
This is the embarrassed Henry episode, like
Yeah,
the
yeah. You're gonna have to edit all of this out, Henry.
it's just,
It's all my fault. It's all my fault.
oh,
Well, I tell you what,
Howard.
I guess I'm going to hear about this after you guys leave. Um, I think this begs having you come back in 6 months or a
Yeah, I
year
would
just to
love
see
to.
what's going on.
Yeah,
And I don't there's who knows what our world is going to be like in 6 months or a year in our industry, and the influence that this beast, and you're just one iteration of it, is going to have. So, um, as new as you are, I think it'll be fun kind of following you. We follow young, emerging talent, students, and recent graduates from some of these advertising programs. and we want to bring them back to see how their careers are unfolding. And we talk to old farts, people who've been around forever, and they prognosticate and pontificate about everything. So this is something new that you know is changing everybody's world. So with that in mind, Fab Dolan and Adam Green of 99 Ravens, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
Yes, I am. And he's Howard Eibach.
And together,
We're the Brief Brothers. Till next time. Bye
bye
bye.
bye.